Today's homework is basically just applying the Pythagorean theorem using a squared plus b squared equals c squared and just getting used to that. So number one, it says Yuritsa is planning to drive from Edgartown to Vineyard Haven to Oak Bluffs. How much shorter would her drive be if she just drove directly from Edgartown to Oak Bluffs? So everything's labeled for you. It's actually already drawn out for you too. So they want to know the distance between Edgartown and Oak Bluffs. So when we're learning about the Pythagorean theorem, we always know that the hypotenuse is always going to be the longest, and it's always going to be labeled as C. The other two sides don't matter. So I have A, I have B, and since I'm looking for B, I want my equation to equal B squared. That way I don't have to adjust any of my equations or my variables to make it easy for myself. I'm going to start with the longest side, C squared, and subtract A squared to get my B squared. So C squared in this case is 5, minus the 3, and then have B squared left. So remember, 5 squared does not mean 5 times 2, it means 5 times 5. So that's 25 minus 3 times 3, which is 9, which equals B squared. So we need to figure out 25 minus 9 gives me 16, and that's B squared. I don't want B squared, I just want B. So I need to square root both sides. So B equals 4, and in this case it's 4 miles. The next one is very similar. Some hikers at Porter Mountain are trying to get to Mount Marcy, but an avalanche has gotten in their way. Now they have to go to Algonquin Mountain first, then to Mount Marcy. How many miles did the avalanche add to their trip? So it looks like I have A and B, and I'm looking for C. So I can just use my regular A squared plus B squared equals C squared. This problem, I'll help you substitute your variables, but you're going to go ahead and solve that on your own. So it looks like A is 8, B is 15, and you're looking for C. So go ahead and figure out what C is, not C squared, but just C. Number 3, a painter leans a 15-foot ladder against a house. So I could kind of say this is my house. And he's saying a ladder is leaning against that. So when I'm looking at this already, I know that I'm trying to make a right triangle. The base of the ladder is 5 feet from the house. So from the house, it's 5 feet. To the nearest tenth of a foot, how high on the house does the ladder reach? So since the ladder is 15 feet, this is my 15. So I have my C, I have my B, I'm looking for an A. Or it could be you're looking for B and you have A, doesn't matter. So with that, I'm going to use C squared minus B squared equals A squared since I'm looking for A. This is 15 squared minus 5 squared equals A squared. I'll help you out with this one since it wants it to the nearest tenth. So if it's asking me for a decimal, it's asking me to approximate. So 15 times 15 gives me 225. 5 times 5 gives me 25, and that leaves me with A squared. So 225 minus 25 is 200 equals A squared. And I only want A, so I'm going to square root. So I end up with A equals square root of 200. Now square root of 200 is definitely not to the nearest tenth. So we're going to have to figure out what 200 fits between for perfect squares. But remember, one of the lessons I talked about how if you simplify your radical first, it's going to be a lot easier because on the SBAC they will give you large numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and do a factor tree first. 200, I get 100 times 2. Here's a prime. Then I can split it into 10 and 10, and then 2 and 5, and 2 and 5 again. So if I were to write this in order, I would end up with 2 times 2 times 2 times 5 times 5. And I see a pattern, or not a pattern, but I see pairs. A pair of 2s and a pair of 5s. That means if I rewrite this, I end up with 4 times 25 times 2. So square root of 4 gives me 2. Square root of 25 gives me 5. And whatever's left over is 2. So that gives me 10 radical 2. However, they're still asking for a decimal because it's asking for the nearest tenth. So now all I have to do is find the nearest tenth for radical 2. So radical 2 is between radical 1 and radical 4. My total is going to be between 1 and 4. So 4 minus 1 gives me 3. 2 minus 1 gives me 1. So 1/3 gives me approximately 0.3. Since it's between 1 and 2, it's about 1.3. That's only for the radical 2. I have to multiply that by 10. So when I multiply this by 10, I ended up with 13. So it's the nearest tenth, but I actually got a whole number. So I can write that my answer is approximately 13.0 feet. And the last question. A pigeon leaves its nest in New York City and flies 5 miles east. So it looks like I need a compass here. So here's my north, my south, my west, my east. So if he's flying 5 miles east, he's going this way 5 miles. Then it flies north 3 miles, so it's going to go up 3. How far is a pigeon from its nest? So it looks like it's looking for the hypotenuse. So once again, I'll help you set this up, and then you're going to look for the answer yourself. Since I'm looking for c, I'm going to use a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Here's my a and b. So I have 5 squared plus 3 squared equals c squared. So go ahead and solve and see if you can find c on your own.